Those are our communities, and our people will do everything in their power to protect them. It is my job as a chief to make sure that my firefighters are funded appropriately, are equipped appropriately, and they're trained appropriately. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm in this seat. I will not stop until I get that for them.
You've spoken with the Fire Commission. You have made it very clear that this department is underfunded, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
This department was asked to take a $17 million budget cut.
That is correct.
How does that affect your department?
It impacts our ability to provide service, absolutely.
How did that affect the firefight in the Palisades and beyond?
So, first and foremost, what I just said before is making sure our firefighters have the ability to provide service. So $17 million cut did not allow us to do what we needed to do. And where that impacted us specifically for Palisades was our ability to move into reserve apparatus. The $17 million cut into our ability to utilize resources that should be at our disposal that we were unable to fix because the funding was not there because of cuts to our mechanics.
What type of apparatus are we talking about specifically?
Mainly fire engines and ambulances.
That right there is the LA fire chief, and she decided that she was going to tell that person that was interviewing her the truth about what was going on, how bad the government has been in setting up the fire department for success, and yes, they ran out of water while trying to fight the Palisades fires, and that is one of the reasons why the damage was so severe. And obviously, this ruffled a ton of feathers in Democratic Party politics. Obviously, Mayor Karen Bass is big angry about this, so this ultimately ended up leading to a confrontation where the mayor summoned her to her office away from the front lines fighting the fires, away from her duties to actually manage fighting the fires in an attempt to fire her. But due to a weird instance of people getting a wind of this or her telling enough people what was about to go down, she ultimately ended up keeping her job in what has to be, again, a stunning incompetence for the mayor Karen Bass, because she can't even fire somebody in retribution appropriately for telling the truth about what actually went down. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But as I've said in multiple videos as of late, there are real world consequences to these government actions, to these failures, and to these weather disasters and fire disasters. And chief among them is that real people ended up losing their homes, including a friend of the channel, Devin Tracy. You might know him as AIU. His parents, they ended up losing their home. Devin is currently running a GoFundMe for them. They've lost everything. It's absolutely horrible, and I would really appreciate it if you guys know him and you want to support him, if you donate via the link in the top of the description. And of course, if you guys want to help me, he is a friend of mine, so helping his parents would make me feel better. Please do so as well. Now, of course, if you don't like Devin, if he's not your cup of tea, and therefore you think that you don't want to donate to his parents, I will hold nothing against you. If you don't know him, if you have other problems, I completely understand. It's not about force. I'm just telling you about the situation. Now let's get into this situation because it's absolutely chaotic.
You are looking at Chief Kristen Crowley, whose sources inside the LAFD tell NBC4 this afternoon was summoned to a meeting with Mayor Bass. And that may seem odd to you, almost sort of a big head scratch as to why the fire chief in the middle of a firefight would be asked to meet with the mayor. But that is what's going on. The meeting started at 4 o'clock this afternoon. There was supposed to be a briefing led by Mayor Bass at 5:30 this afternoon. Eric Leonard, our colleague who is there, tells me that that briefing now will only be with the LAPD briefing the media. It will not include Chief Crowley. It will not include Mayor Bass.
So look, obviously we can all understand what is going on in terms of this particular meeting. Mayor Karen Bass was absolutely livid when she discovered that her own fire chief was undercutting the narrative, that Democrats never do anything wrong and they're innocent Beba Angel Aladdins. So she decided to summon the fire chief in order to fire her. However, obviously some intervening factors happened between there that this woman, the fire chief, ended up finding out about late, because even though she made it to the meeting, they decided to kind of reverse course and only have the police do a meeting with not the mayor, which is obviously rather odd. It makes me think that somebody got in Karen Bass's ear and told her, hey, if you fire your fire chief right now, then that's going to signal that the government is somewhat accountable for their failures in this particular instance, and we absolutely can't have that, because what we're doing right now is completely running defense for the Democrats. And by the way, the lies replies are ridiculous and absurd. So one of the things that people have been talking about is the problems with water in the California. And of course, specifically, they were talking about a couple of different things. But obviously, when firefighters went to tap the hydrants at the Palisades and no water came out, that pissed a lot of people off. And it turns out the water in the reservoir that was nearby that these people could have relied on has been drained since February of 2024, according to this report.
This was supposed to be the water to put out the Palisades fire. This is the Santa Ynez Reservoir. It's the water supply basically for the Palisades. When they first started fighting the Palisades fire, they ran out of water extremely quickly. Wednesday, 3 a.m., they were basically out. And there's been a lot of talk on why this happened. So how long has this reservoir been empty for?
Since February of last year. There was no communication from the Department of Water and Power to LAFD that there was a water supply issue.
The firefighters, when they started fighting the fires, no one informed them that the reservoir was empty. This reservoir holds 117 million gallons of water. The fire department was using a water supply from 3 backup tanks, each one only holding 1 million gallons of water.
Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is that supposedly this reservoir has scheduled maintenance. They need to fix the roof that covers it or something of the sort. But as this reporter points out, when he was actually there, despite the fact that it's under construction allegedly, there is no actual construction going on.
They say it's closed for maintenance to repair the lid that's on top of it. I don't know a lot about reservoir maintenance, but there's literally no construction materials or vehicles anywhere in sight. Also, with a reservoir like this, you can refill it or start to refill it. So another question is, if they saw the Santa Ana winds were coming and we have this remarkably dry wet season, why was there no attempt to start refilling it back up?
Now, to a normie, to the uninitiated, it might seem rather odd that there's no construction equipment there while this reservoir has to be drained as it is an active construction zone. But if you know anything about California, this makes perfect sense. In our first video breaking down the wildfires, we talked about how the few Republicans were calling out the Newsom administration for not even breaking ground on construction projects that were voted for and paid for, by the way, back in 2014 when California voters went to the ballot box and demanded that they build more water storage. And even though they had a site that has been studied and has been cleared in order to build the reservoir since back in the Eisenhower administration, ground has yet to be broken. And in fact, insanely, the governor's top guy on water, who by the way is called Jerry Brown and has no relation to the previous California governor to which Gavin Newsom was the lieutenant governor, who was also named Jerry Brown, was proud of the timetable that they were operating on, because he said, we're almost done with permits, we might be finished by the end of 2024, and then maybe, just maybe, we can break ground on this in 2025 and be done in 6 or 7 years. Again, that is an actual quote from an article where they're describing when they're going to break ground and when they're going to complete a project that was voted for and paid for back in 2014. So to me, them saying they're going to fix the roof of this particular water reservoir or whatever they want to do in terms of construction and no construction equipment being there for the next decade and this remaining completely empty makes perfect sense when we're talking about the state of California. Now, of course, these are facts. These are very inconvenient facts for both Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, and of course, the Newsom Defense Squad that has suddenly emerged on the internet.com. And in fact, they're so inconvenient as facts that Gavin Newsom has decided to waste even more time and resources by setting up a website to fact check all of the claims that are being made. And by the way, the fact that this reservoir was empty is why they actually had to go to those water towers, which only had 1 million gallons or some other measurement, I forget what it was, versus the 137 million gallons that can be stored in these reservoirs. So again, the backup tanks, which there were 3 of them, had 1 million gallons, and this reservoir that they could have tapped in order to save some of the homes in the Palisades would have stored well over 40 times that much in terms of water.
President-elect Trump has blamed you for this crisis. He called you incompetent. What's your response?
Well, I called for him to come out, take a look for himself. We want to do it in the spirit of an open hand, not a closed fist. He's the president-elect. I respect the office. We have a president of the United States that within 36 hours provided a major disaster declaration over a text. We had support from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, with 100% reimbursement, all the resources you could hope for or imagine, constant communication. I'd like to extend that to the President-elect. I don't know what he's referring to when he talks about the Delta smelt in reservoirs. The reservoirs are completely full, the state reservoirs here in Southern California. That mis and disinformation, I don't think advantages or aids any of us. Responding to Donald Trump's insults, we would spend another month. I'm very familiar with them. Every elected official that he disagrees with, very familiar with them.
We do know, though, from reporting here locally that one reservoir that serves the Palisades was not full.
And that's exactly what triggered my desire to get the investigation to understand what was happening with that local reservoir.
I just want you guys to think about what happened right there. Gavin Newsom was asked about Donald Trump calling him incompetent and rightfully blaming him for the failures in infrastructure that led to this terrible response. And Newsom said, that's absurd. There's these rumors about all this water reservoirs being empty or whatever, but the fact of the matter is we had a bunch of reservoirs that are full and honestly over the historical averages for a water reservoir. The reporter then follows up by telling him that the Palisades reservoir was not full. It was drained. And in fact, this is the key one that was needed in order to fight the fires in the Palisades. And then Newsom, without missing a beat, without acknowledging that he's being very underhanded in the way that he's talking about this, says, well, that's why I called for an independent investigation into that reservoir. So the reservoirs were full, no big deal, nothing to worry about. It's misinformation to say that they ran out of water. But also, when I find out that they did run out of water, and I realized that this Meet the Press guy was actually going to ask me that question, which I wasn't expecting because I'm a Democrat, that's why I called in for an independent investigation. I'm Gavin Newsom, please vote for me, and ain't I the most empathetic, charismatic governor of all time? And of course, the head person in charge of this water, who could have informed the fire department about this, didn't do so, according to, again, Crowley, the fire chief, the one who called out Bass, and the one who was on the cusp of being fired. So to be clear, the reason why California firefighters tapped the fire hydrants and they were empty is because of the incompetence of water management that comes from Governor Gavin Newsom, and again, also additional incompetence that comes from Karen Bass. And what's crazy about this is that even in their fact checks, they end up demonstrating their incompetence. For whatever reason, they decided that they were going to focus group the idea, I guess, of running out of water and how stupid that sounds in a first world country, and they decided that running out of water is the absolute worst thing politically for Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. And make no mistake about it, they did in fact run out of water. The towers that were the backups were wholly inadequate for this particular job, and they would have had many times as much water and many times the opportunity in order to fight the fires had they not drained this reservoir, or had they just built the infrastructure to support this hydrant, even though the reservoir was drained. But instead, they said, look, the pumps and the pressure and the this and the that, and it was just an infrastructure failure, and it's not us running out of water. We have so much water in the reservoirs. We were so prepared. It's just the infrastructure pressure, whatever, because look at all those other reservoirs that are further away that don't necessarily service this particular area, the one that was hit, and the one that had the reservoir that was completely empty. It's totally fine. Now, of course, they should have had the infrastructure to get the water pressure up to the point, even if I believe that's true, so that they could put out the fires, and when you tap the fire hydrants, it doesn't run empty. And of course, the head of their water board blamed the firefighters, blamed the civilians, because they said they were using too much water at the same time in order to fight these fires.
We ran out of water in the first tank about 4:45 p.m. yesterday. We ran out of water in the second tank about 8:30 p.m. and the third tank about 3 a.m. this morning. Those tanks help with the pressure on the fire hydrants and the hills of Palisades. And because we were pushing so much water in our trunk line, and so much water was being used before it can get to the tanks, we were not able to fill the tanks fast enough. So the consumption of water was faster than we can provide water in our trunk line. So I want to make sure that you understand there's water on the trunk line, It just cannot get up the hill because we cannot fill the tanks fast enough.
Now, it's very important for you guys to understand that the mistakes that were made here were years in the making. Obviously, it is a long-term policy, and to be fair to Mayor Karen Bass, she hasn't been the mayor all that long, and a lot of people are making a lot of hay about the $17.6 million that were cut from the budget, but you need to understand a couple of things. First and foremost, that cut was absolutely in the budget going forward for the year. In addition to that, Mayor Karen Bass actually advocated for something like a $23 million budget cut, and this was to redirect funds in order to go to homeless services, despite the fact that the state of California has already incinerated $24 billion on homeless services. However, the way that the Democrats are dodging this is that they talk about the negotiations that happened with the city and the fire department union, and they talk about how post the negotiations, which was after that cut was put in, they set aside an additional $50 million in order to compensate the firefighters and whatnot for their benefits. Now, that is technically in the fire department budget, but that goes to staff and whatnot rather than to actual services. So they cut from one area, which is fire prevention and the things that people actually need in order to fight this stuff, and they ended up giving it in pensions and healthcare and all of that. And to be clear, these brave firefighters that are out there fighting this fire and improvising because the hydrants don't work definitely deserve to be commended for their behavior, and I do want them compensated for their bravery. But to be clear, that budget cut is not the key reason why there's stuff that is failing. Because remember, that $17.5 million represents something like 2% of the total budget of the Los Angeles Fire Department. However, like is often is the case, the dollar amount and the budget amount is more than enough to cover the job that is needed, but what ends up getting skimped on in that budget is the problem. There's a bunch of different civilian staffing positions that have been dropping off at LAFD for a very long time. Included in those civilian positions are maintenance people. And again, how many times do I have to say this, that the government would rather build something big, dumb, and useless than do ordinary maintenance and upkeep in order to keep things running efficiently? Well, it turns out that's true in the fire department. So yeah, while you could talk about increasing the fire department's budget overall over time or whatever, and you could talk about how they gave more money to these people in terms of pay, in terms of overtime, in terms of all sorts of benefits for said firefighters, the fact of the matter is they have a bunch of civilian positions that are unfilled. Karen Bass is trying to remove those positions from the budget, and had they had the proper maintenance up for their fire trucks, for their equipment, apparently, according to the fire chief, they would actually have been able to field 100 more trucks out there in order to fight off these fires. That could be absolutely crucial and could make the difference between losing your home and having your home saved.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you. It gives that person a little bit more ease, knowing that somebody might understand their situation better. Is she strong enough to do this? Or, you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire. Which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
Now, like I said, you can be critical of the budget as you can be critical of the DEI initiatives at the LA Fire Department, but you need to understand that that particular issue or those particular issues have more to do with priorities rather than actual impact on this particular response, because the reason why they ended up running out of water in the hydrants had nothing to do with the fact that they're trying to recruit overweight lesbians to join the fire department, but it is that same mindset that they have about how we need to make sure the firefighters look like you, we need to make sure that there are more women in the fire department, but also they're not going to be able to carry you out of a fire and that's your fault. That permeates throughout California governance. Again, they didn't do the regular ordinary maintenance that they need, the important stuff, because they were more interested in flashy superficial things. And that is true in terms of water management policy as it is true in terms of DEI. So that's the way that I think it's important to talk about it, rather than just saying that the incompetence of these overweight female firefighters that represent 5% of the force are somehow indicative of the overall problems with this particular issue. So let's be clear about what is going on in the state of California. They had terrible management of not only their forests, but of course of their water resources. They drained a key reservoir, said that they were going to do maintenance on it, and there is no construction crew in sight, and there is no scheduled completion time. And again, it's been drained for nearly a year without any improvements and without it being refilled. The backups were wholly inadequate in order to meet the task, and in addition to that, Gavin Newsom is absolutely terrible in forest maintenance. Now, of course, on his fact check website, he's talking about how he's leading the world and he's increased forest management tenfold since he's taken office. But the fact of the matter is, in my previous video, we went over an article from NPR that showed us that Gavin Newsom was greatly overestimating on purpose, and in fact contradicted his own state numbers, how much forest acres are being managed. And by the way, he wasn't even close. He was saying back then they're doing 90,000 acres a year, but in reality, they had only done 11,000 acres. Again, according to NPR investigating Gavin Newsom, not according to me. An absolute scumbag from top to bottom, and now he made his own website saying that he's investigated himself and found himself innocent, and here are the facts with the same type of lies he got caught telling back in 2021. In terms of the fire department budget, the $17.6 million is not the key thing in a budget of in and around $800 million. However, the years of neglect of maintenance, the years of allowing those civilian positions to go unfilled, are not compensated by throwing a big dollar amount or setting aside an additional $50 million post the negotiations with the firefighters union after you put that cut into the budget. So while the cut itself is not a big deal, the long-term mismanagement of the agency absolutely is. Are you guys sensing a theme? Are you detecting something that is common in the state of California and in the city of Los Angeles? They spend big money on many things, but nothing actually gets done. In addition to that, the claims about how, the water, totally fine, totally sensible. It's just, the pressure was bad and blah, 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 and pay no attention to the fact that running more water increases pressure, and that's also an infrastructure failure. But we had plenty of water in these other reservoirs that was completely inaccessible to the Palisades, but the reservoir that was accessible to the Palisades was empty, but we're never going to talk about that because look at the water levels in the 4 reservoirs that we're highlighting. And by the way, if you're wondering if those are new reservoirs, the answer is no. I looked this up on twitter.com and discovered that one of these reservoirs was completed in 1953, the other in 1959, one in 1974, and the most recent one, the Diamond Valley one, was completed in the year 2000. And by the way, the earlier ones took about 3 years to build. The one in 2000 actually was started in 1995, so 5 years. So California has gotten so much worse now that money appropriated in order to fund additional reservoirs, additional water storage in 2014 hasn't even broken ground, again, 11 years later in 2025. They're still in the permitting process, but don't worry, Jerry Brown over at the water department is optimistic that they might be able to clear the permit soon for the state to do a state project. Now, I also want to add that Senator Elizabeth Warren, Governor Gavin Newsom, and the folks over at Pod Save America are supposedly raising money for the wildfires. And by the way, I'm going to do a whole video on this later, but it turns out the long and short of it is they're actually linking to Act Blue, which is a Democratic Party PAC where you can donate to their party. There's a 4% fee for donating through them, and of course there's only select organizations that are designated as recipients of this. And even if they waive that fee, even if they say, you know what, we're not going to take that 4%, we're going to cover the transaction fee plus the Act Blue fee, the fact of the matter is this is a way to capture emails of people people so that the Democrats can solicit additional funding. Absolute scumbaggery to the nth degree, and considering Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, shared one of these links, Senator Elizabeth Warren did so, and the folks over at Pod Save America, they should be condemned totally for this. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. What do you think about the fire chief versus the mayor? The fire chief actually telling the truth in some regard while they're going into full cover-up mode at the governor's mansion and in the mayor's office? All your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the nonsense in LA and in California. Till next time.